Hey everyone, or hey no one if nobody's here yet. Just gonna take a few minutes, let people come in and get set up, and if you're watching this once it's no longer live, then you're of course watching from the beginning. Okay. Okay, so I just thought it'd be nice to get streaming again. I tried this out a while ago when I was preparing for a big recital and an album, and I was practicing a lot, and I thought it was a good way to sort of hold myself accountable for my practicing. So I wanted to bring it back and see if people like it. And I don't have a really big agenda for practicing today, but it's good to sort of talk about warm-ups and talk about getting started. I'm getting ready to film a video tomorrow for my channel, so I thought I could practice that repertoire and just kind of talk and go from there. All right, I'm just gonna wait another minute or so before getting started. One thing that's a little unfortunate with this setup is I've got my microphone right next to my laptop, and my laptop, which is doing the streaming, is kind of big and a little on the old side, so the fan of the laptop is pretty loud, so you can probably hear that on the microphone, which is too bad, but working with what I got. All right, might as well get tuned. Tuning is always a long process. Ooh, look at that. The webcam does not know where I am. There we go. Focusing, getting better. I do not know how to autofocus the webcam, so I hope it figures it out. That's looking a little better. Is it quiet? Too quiet? Looks like it's a little on the quiet side, looking at my levels. So I'm going to see if I can make it a little louder. Nobody in the chat. Don't be afraid to say something in the chat. Okay, we'll give this a try. Oh, hi, Game Chops. Thanks for coming by. If there's anything weird with the audio or the picture, please let me know. I tune is check my bridge. This is something good to do for any cellist, but especially if you're a Baroque cellist and you tune with the pegs a lot, your bridge can start to warp in a lot of different directions. So try to check that as much as I can. Let's see how audio is doing. Oh, the audio could be pitched up from the sample rate. Let's see if we can get that. The hiss is my laptop fan, unfortunately. Let's see if I can fix the pitched up issue. Thanks for bearing with me. Let's try this for a second. Okay, swapping audio while I see if I can get my cello mic to be working. All right. I am going to change the frequency on my microphone thingy here and see if this fixes it once I switch back. You're welcome. I'm glad that you are enjoying the stream so far. It's not exciting yet. Hopefully it will get exciting. Okay. Let's switch back now and see if I am no longer high-pitched. Okay. Can you hear me now? Is my pitch level the same? Okay, looks like we're good to go. And now there are 5 people here, which is awesome. I appreciate, oh, now there's 4 people. Never mind, that person didn't like that comment. Okay, let's get started. Gonna start tuning, doing some warm-ups, just talking general cello stuff. And yeah, I'll check back every now and then on the chat. One of the things I like to do is check my bridge whenever I tune, because the bridge is going to get pulled from either fine tuners if you're playing on a modern cello and you have tuners down here, or from turning the pegs. The bridge, as you probably know, is not glued in place, so the wood will warp. And as the bridge warps, it can eventually actually break, or it just kind of hinders. It affects the sound of the cello. So I always try to make sure that my bridge is completely perpendicular. Let's see if the webcam can handle adjusting to this. As straight as possible, perpendicular to the instrument. And you can gently apply pressure in one way or another very carefully to sort of push it back into place. Okay, so for this stream, I'm going to spend a little time just doing warm-ups. It's really just a practice session, so not like a concert, but I'm just here to kind of hang out with you, add some cello to your life, if that's what you want, talk a little bit about my practice habits and what I go through, and just kind of casually hang out with you on this Friday afternoon. So what I do for warm-ups is scales. Really can't do anything better in this world than scales. And I like to alternate bowing patterns, but I always start with like just a legato long bow to really get my sound into the instrument.
start on C major and then work my way around the circle of fifths, usually until I reach about 3 sharps, and then I'll go to flats. I don't go through all my major scales, just practically speaking for Baroque music. You don't often see more than 3 sharps and 3 flats, so if I'm being time efficient and I don't want to spend my time playing every single scale, I'll go through circle of fifths starting at C, C, G, D, and then I'll go to flat scales and do F, B flat, E flat. So that was my C. I'll go through to my G now. I'm still keeping just on long bows. Using my stand for these scales. Long bows are really good, especially when you're warming up, because you don't want to force yourself into fast motions before you're really ready. It's really good to start slow and practice almost like a singer would practice breath control. We want to practice pressure control across the whole length of the bow, and you'd be surprised, especially if you're cold or you're not ready to play yet, it can actually be pretty challenging in the beginning, so it's a good exercise. On to D major. Shifting over to our flat keys, so we'll go into F major, still keeping long bows. Boston now, it's slowly becoming spring, and especially on these Baroque instruments, the weather really affects how well the instrument does. And this is really true of all string instruments. The bridge rises in the winter as it gets more hot and dry, and as it gets moist, it gets lower. So instruments are always adjusting to the weather, which is a bit of a challenge, but that's part of the fun of it. Okay, keep going in flat scales for still warming up, so B flat now. two notes are good, that's how you know you're warming up. Might just check my tuning again though. Retuning is also just part of the fun with early music, though I had not played cello yet today when I started the stream, so as I continue to tune it through the warm-ups, by the time I'm actually playing music, it'll probably be fairly settled in and hopefully won't have to be retuned. So, long bows. Technically we still have E flat left, but I want to move on to my next level bow stroke from the long bow, which is a long, short stroke, though the shorts are not really short. Stroke for getting your bow fingers kind of awake, which can take a little while, because on those shorter notes is where the finger motion really comes in. So we want to be not doing an arm stroke, but actually letting the fingers guide those shorter notes. So I'm going to go back to C major and begin my circle of fifths again. and kind of getting in touch with your instrument, but you can kind of let your mind wander. So long as you know your fingerings, scales are really nice for just kind of getting in the zone. I'm gonna see, look over here, I realize I left my chair in the shot. What's going on? Move the wicker chair out of the view of the webcam. I realized that after, I just realized that. Okay, here's a question. Do I ever practice different intonations when you have to play with different instruments or just on the fly? Yeah, that's a really good question. Let's see. So in terms of temperaments, and I was going to talk about this a little bit with the scales. So I generally go for a sort of pure sounding temperament when I'm practicing, pure within my own instrument. So I tune my fifths in a way that sounds sort of pure, and then I go for thirds that sound pure, which is going to mean lower major thirds, higher minor thirds, just something that makes my instrument sound in tune and resonant. In general, you kind of never know what you're going to be working with temperaments, and as a continuo player, whatever your keyboard instrument is tuned to, you're a little bit of a slave to that, since they're going to be playing every single note that you're playing. You don't really have much flexibility with intonation. You really have to match what your keyboard is tuned to. And even if they're tuned to quarter comma mean tone or, whatever other temperament that you have, maybe something a little bit closer to equal than that, you don't know if they tuned it, to favor A major, favor F major, favor C minor. Even with that, you don't know exactly how the harpsichordist or keyboard player tuned the instrument. So you do really have to use your ear and do it on the fly for the most part. The only thing that I will actually do in my practicing that I will adjust to is if I know I'm doing a gig that's going to be an equal temperament, maybe because that's just how they need to tune the instrument or something like that. If I have a pretty demanding part where I feel like I won't be able to do a ton of adjusting on the fly, I'll try to practice at least mentally thinking to be closer to equal and further from a tempered tuning. But for the most part, you have to be kind of prepared to listen and adjust, which I think is one of the hardest parts of being a continuo player, because intonation is already hard on a string instrument with no frets, and then having to adjust to so many different temperaments is another challenge. So yeah. Do electric tuners support different intonations? I don't know if actual tuners do, but I have an app called ClearTune that will give you any temperament you want. It's got a bunch of choices, Vivaldi and every kind of mean tone, and you can set your pitch level to 415 or whatever other pitch level, 392, and then choose your temperament and what you want that temperament, which key you want it to be based off of, C major, A minor, or something different. And it will actually give you every single one, though I kind of use it as a reference. I typically just use my ear more than I use something absolute. Yeah, continuo players, we have a hard job. Our job is making the soloist sound great and still somehow doing everything we need to do. Can I play Dvorak on this cello? I could, but it would not sound good. Though gut strings, which I have on this instrument, they are, gut strings were used up into the 20th century, even though we're so used to hearing romantic music and later music on steel strings. Gut strings were still used in Dvorak's time, but the rest of the build of this cello, I don't even know if this fingerboard would even go up high enough for the Dvorak concerto, because it's so much shorter, as you can see from the distance of the fingerboard to the bridge. And then this bow would be awful for Dvorak, because this bow has a very light tip. So trying to get a really strong up bow or a really sustained bow stroke, just not really going to happen on this. So answer, you could play Dvorak on it, but you definitely wouldn't want to, and I don't think it would sound very good. All right. So I'm going to continue with my warm-ups for somewhat selfish reasons, because it's good to warm up. So I'm going to keep warming up for maybe another 5 or 10, and then I'll get into a little bit more repertoire. But I'll come back here and check on the chat and answer your questions, so feel free to drop those in whenever you want. I'm going to move the chair out of the frame now. Let's see. Daisy. Let's see if she walks into the frame. Here she comes. Oh, you always see her tail. Ooh, one-handed cat hole. This is Daisy. She's a good one. Well, for now she is. We'll see what happens. All right, so back to scales. Back to the long, short, short rhythm. I think I was on A major. Keys. And back on the temperament topic, one of the things I'll always check is something like a B flat with my open D. And try to get that to a point where it sounds really pure, which means usually putting it higher. An equal temperament B flat might be more like something like that. I don't know, I always go for pure. Just a nicer sound. Okay, F major. Scale on the long, short, short bowing, and then I'm going to switch up the bowings a bit more. done warming up. How often do I change the strings? So, strings are probably one of the most expensive equipment pieces that regularly have to be changed. So I think probably most professional musicians who have to pay for that probably put it off more than we should. I think what I learned for the basic rule on steel strings was something like you should change the strings every 4 to 6 months. And it's probably, I think 4 months is not really necessary. Gut strings, if you get really good quality ones, should last you 6 months to a year. I'll usually go about a year, but after about the 8-month mark, I can definitely tell I need new ones. But with good technique, you can kind of make things work for a little bit longer and do your best to sort of get the best sound out of the strings that you have. And it also depends how much you're playing. If you're professional and you're playing all the time, you'll definitely notice it after 6 or 8 months. But if you're playing more casually and you're not putting hours and hours into your instrument, your strings will last a little bit longer. Okay, so the last set of bow warm-ups that I do on scales, I'm going to see if I have the book, actually come from the Sevchik technique books. Let's see. Bow technique, Sevchik. I'm not super, oh, look at how it matches the cello right in the background like that. So these were recommended to me from my teacher in grad school, and I did not work all the way through the book, but there's just a lot of good suggestions of different bow patterns to do to warm up on, kind of combinations of eighth notes, triplets, sixteenths. So I sort of devised my own warm-up method using those rhythms as inspiration. So what I do is I still work my way around circle of fifths through scales, doing kind of a different pattern on each scale. So as I go through these, you'll see me kind of alternating different rhythms and different strokes. I'll start to do some shorter, more off the string types of strokes, and you'll see. On scales, you have the opportunity to be a little bit more musical and kind of phrase with your scales as opposed to making everything super equal. Again, in Baroque music, we really don't want to make everything sound the same. We want to have some variation, some things that are emphasized, some things that are de-emphasized. Bow strokes, I think, because we like to be on down bows at the beginnings of things. We like to go the same direction, have that be kind of our timekeeper. So triplets, because it's an odd number, makes us going the reverse direction on every other group of 3, which feels really awkward and is hard to get used to bow technique-wise. So I think it's a good thing to warm up on. And then probably my last warm-up rhythm is a dotted rhythm, like a dotted eighth with a 16th note, because that's a pretty advanced bow technique when you're not hooking them, hooking meaning down, down, up. That's kind of the modern way of doing that rhythm, but in Baroque style, we typically do them down, up, which means you're going to have to coordinate your up bow a little bit. So if I put it in slow motion, I'm actually coming off a bit on the down bow, and in the curve as I come up, I'm fitting the up bow in right at the end and keeping the up bow somewhat legato into the next down bow. So that's a technique that takes some time, definitely using fingers on the bow. So I like to do that one in scales also. Okay, so I think I'm sufficiently warmed up, played scales for a while. Just gonna check in with the chat before going on to stuff. Oh, no one said anything, all good. Okay. Hopefully you guys can hear my talking audio okay if I'm all the way over here. If anything is too quiet, be sure to let me know, because I can mess with it or at least come closer to the microphone and talk. So what I'm going to be practicing, at least to start, is a Vivaldi Largo movement. So I'll be playing the solo part, so you won't have the full experience with the continual part and the accompaniment. This is just me practicing my part. But I'm excited to do this movement because I'm getting together with a harpsichord player to do a video for the channel, and I have really wanted to have harpsichord on the channel, but logistically it's a little hard. I film most of my videos here at home and I don't have a harpsichord, so that's been the biggest limiting factor. But I love the harpsichord. It's easily one of my favorite instruments, and especially as a continuo player at heart, I play with harpsichord all the time, and I'm very comfortable and happy when I'm playing with harpsichord. So me and my friend Dylan, who's the harpsichord player, are going to be recording a Vivaldi Largo movement that gives a lot of opportunity for the harpsichord player to really express themselves through the continuo part. If you don't know much about continuo, especially when continuo is played on a chordal instrument, there's a lot of sort of improvisation that goes on for keyboard and chordal instruments in the continuo part. So when you have something like a slow movement that has a lot of room to explore that, you can have a really, really interesting, expressive continuo part. But for now, I'm just going to be focusing on the solo part. This is the Largo from Vivaldi's third cello sonata in A minor. And I'll show you this now. I use this really great, with the camera focus, facsimile edition of these. Browdy Brothers is the publisher. And you can see it's got this really beautiful handwritten part. And it's got the figured bass in there and everything. So the top line is the solo part, bottom line is the continual part, which harpsichord will be playing in the video once we film. So yeah. Yeah, so this movement has a lot of different opportunities for bowing things, rhythm things, because we get dotted rhythm a lot, which we often, like I already talked about when I'm warming up on a dotted rhythm, we often don't want to do a hooked bowing on a dotted rhythm. But there are exceptions to that, and I think when we want to try to make a line more legato with dots, it really helps to have the hooked bowing. But when we want something to be dramatic, we really don't want to hook it because it takes away from that. So this opening, which is actually a unison for both the continuo and the solo part, I would definitely want to play those separate, because hooking that, even if it's dramatic, it doesn't really have the same effect when it's hooked. But then we get into things that are more longer lines, like so I might consider hooking some of those just for contrast, but I have not made up my mind, to be totally honest. I always like to start from separate first and then kind of see what I want to add. And then the other thing to think about in a movement like this is ornamentation, because if you get a modern edition of something like Vivaldi, you're going to have an editor that's putting in some kind of trills, ornaments, and things like that. Vivaldi himself did not write in many of these ornaments, and that was pretty typical for the time period, especially for Italians. The Italians were known to ornament like crazy, and it was sort of a given that you were going to add trills, that you were going to ornament the second time you played something. So just because it's not there doesn't mean it's not going to happen. But then it's really up to you, and I forget who said this. There's a great treatise source from, I think, the 18th century that says, better to play a beautiful melody totally plain and really beautifully than to ornament the crap out of it just because you feel that you have to ornament it. So I think it's always a good place to start with the real bare bones of what the melody is and find out exactly how you want to shape that, because the ornaments are always just going to come on top of the melody. You don't want the ornaments to really distort the melody except for some very special occasions. So it's good to start from a sort of simple place and then add on top of that. So let's see. Maybe I'll go through this kind of a bit at a time and talk about some potential simple ornaments to layer on top of it. So for the opening, I think it stands plain, it's unison with the continuo, it should stay as is. Exactly as is. The next part, next two measures. My first instinct would be to add a trill. So that's kind of your simplest thing you can do, is put a trill right there when we land on that. Next part. So another trill can easily be added at that sort of cadence ending moment. And can probably add a few more little ditties in there too, so I'll try something. Just an idea. And then we're back into our unison. So that's sort of the ideas that I'm working with, just looking for little places to insert things. And then once you get really comfortable with that, you can take things even further. comment about hooking the dotted rhythm can make it actually a little bit smoother, but I think it's important to note that you can achieve smoothness in line without slurring, and it's a good challenge to ask yourself to do that with your bow hand, because now this part that I thought would be a good idea to slur, I'm not liking it as much because I feel like it doesn't have enough motion. So this, and then another thing is that I land on that note on an up bow, which doesn't feel good. So an option is I could start the dots up bow so that I land on a down bow. Oops, starting hard. Definitely feels better to land on a down bow, but I'm still not loving the dots. So listen to how I can play it separate, but still keep it in a sort of smoother affect. I'll definitely want to do this separate. You can hear how those dots are articulated really differently than the ones that I want to be a little less. So now that I've thought about it, I think I'm not going to slur those. We get other chances for slurs, a couple that Vivaldi even writes in himself. Ooh, I see a cat, I see a cat. Okay. It was only a matter of time. Okay. You can sit there if you don't knock anything over. We'll see how this goes. Maybe, hopefully this won't affect the sound too much. Moving the microphone away from the cat. Okay. So we do get some slurs from Vivaldi when we get a more melodic part. So that's slur of 2. And then we get a few other slurs of 2, but that's really all he puts in. So just those. He actually, even the second time the same notes are written, he doesn't write the slur the second time. So we have this slurred. Same thing again, but no slurs. So, does that mean he doesn't want you to slur it that time? Maybe, maybe not. A lot of times composers were writing in shorthand, so they would put a slur in, and they would assume that you would know, okay, every time you see this part, slur it like this, unless they deliberately put something different. So, you don't want to take handwritten facsimiles too literally, because they were working with a set of understanding that a performer was going to do a certain thing. And I think too often we get a little bit literal, and that's just not how they were doing it back then. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do now, what I really need to commit to in this is bowings, again, because there's almost nothing in here slurred, and there are going to be little small slurs here and there that I'm going to do just to keep my bow direction going the way I want it to. So I need to figure that out, but that's kind of a boring thing to talk about, but we'll see if I have any revelations. I'm going to play through the A section of this movement with regards to bowings and see what I like and try some things. with some solutions that I like. The only thing that I don't like is ending up bow. So I have to find a good way to sort that out towards the last couple measures of that section. So the last phrase is the one I was just playing before. So it naturally ends on an up bow. Though I have to say, maybe Vivaldi was onto something more than I thought, because the slur that I said that he left out, if I leave out the slur as written, I will end down bow. But I'm just not so sure I want to do that, because musically I want to have that slur there. So now separate here. So that'll make me end on a down bow. But it also makes me reach the top of that line on an up bow, which I don't like as much. So it's a hard call of deciding where the important up bows are, because you can't have up bows and down bows everywhere. I mean, you do have them everywhere, but they have to alternate. You can't have all the down bows in all the places that you want every single time. So it's just sort of making your compromises and thinking about it. So I'm going to go through the B section now, and I'll do a repeat, see if I want to add any little ornaments in the second time. So when you're doing dots or even slurs, ideally you don't want to shift between a 16th note and the next 8th note, because those notes are so close together. So ideally you don't want to shift there, because what I had before, oh, that actually works fine. So these notes are in the same position, and these notes are in the same position. If I were to start up here, I have a shift in a short amount of time. So that's just worth avoiding for nice sounding left hands. So I'm going to try that again with a new fingering. couple ideas now going through that. I think that's enough of that movement though. Been a little while on that. So let's see. Okay. Okay, looking at these questions. Oh, glad you like it. The full version is going to be much better because the harmonies are really, really interesting and exciting. So once the full continuo is there, it's really, really going to be nice, I think. Okay, just looking over everything. So my cello is, I guess you could call my cello a Baroque cello. Let's see, am I in focus? I know that was a little bit of an issue. My cello is built a modern cello. It was built in the 1950s as a modern cello, but about 25 years after that, it was converted to an almost fully Baroque setup. So it has a shorter fingerboard, has a simple tailpiece with no fine tuners. It has a Baroque bridge, gut strings are on it. I believe it has a shorter sound post as well, but the actual angle of the neck has not been changed. That's one thing that is a little bit bigger of an operation to do to a modern instrument to reconvert it, is changing the actual angle of the neck. So I think the neck is technically still a modern neck, but playing wise, the construction of the instrument is in a fully Baroque setup, and the bow is Baroque as well. Okay. So yeah, I think that answers those questions. Does Vivaldi always use modern tuning? Oh yeah, so that's a good question, and tunings were so really fluctuating so much. It's pretty likely that Vivaldi was using the standard A, D, G, C cello tuning. The writing in his sonatas and concertos really shows that it's totally in the fifths modern tuning that we know. And same for violin, because he wrote a lot of violin music and he himself was a violinist. I think he was really accustomed to the tuning in fifths and possibly even helped popularize that. I'm not sure, but he was a huge string composer and wrote all this really lasting string music. So I think he's I see him as the real beginning of that Italian 18th century school of this is the violin and the violin family and this is what it does. So I don't think there's any evidence to support that Vivaldi would have used any of those 17th century Gabrieli type tunings with the A tuned down or anything like that. I think we're pretty much in our standard string tuning at that point. All right. So that was my little homework to do for my next video that I'll be filming tomorrow, actually, with the harpsichordist. So I think maybe what I'll do now that might be a little fun before I get into more cello repertoire is my string quartet, Emergence Quartet, has some concerts coming up, and we're doing a sort of varied program that includes early quartets on period instruments. And we're doing it in the 4/15 tuning because these are really pieces as the quartet emerged and came out of the Baroque era. But there are a couple things in Haydn and also Richter, who was a contemporary of Haydn, some little cello solo moments that wouldn't hurt for me to be practicing. So maybe I'll go over a couple of those. There's some sweet little melodies to be practicing before I get into some more cello music. Get the chair out of the way. Is that the camera is focused on the music stand and not on me. It's possible, but I want to face forward and still be able to see the stand. Okay, so this is Haydn Opus 20, number 4, string quartet in D major? D major. still getting to know this piece, still in rehearsals, but there's an affettuoso movement that has variations, and for one of the variations, the cello gets the melody. So because this is Haydn, this is a little bit later. It's sort of a hybrid situation to be on a Baroque cello with a Baroque bow. Ideally, I might have a transitional bow that would be just a little bit heavier at the tip, not as heavy as a modern bow, but somewhere in between, hence the name transitional, into a classical bow. But I'll be playing on my Baroque bow at 415, no big deal, but just stylistically probably playing a little bit more Haydn-esque, a little bit more legato and sustained. I should actually show you this part because we were lucky enough to get a hold of facsimile parts for these Haydn string quartets, and very different experience. Let's see if the camera gets this. Very different experience playing from a part like this than our standard modern print. And it definitely leaves some debate up, as always, when using a facsimile or a manuscript about bowings and slurs and whether or not to do them or change them or whatever. So that's the fun of rehearsal. We're still working that out in the quartet. Really entertaining. Haydn really forces you across the entire range of the instrument in such a short amount of time. Really acrobatic, which is kind of cool. experience before. I got Daisy when she was 3 months old and she could fit in one hand. And when I got her, I was preparing for my master's recital, so I was practicing minimum 3 hours a day, every day. So she got very, very used to Baroque cello, and she really likes it a lot. Sometimes she'll be sleeping in the other room, and I'll practice, and I'll start practicing, and after about 5 or 10 minutes, she'll come into the room and then lay down on the floor just so she can sleep in the cello room, which is nice. And she's very tolerant of the squeaks and the squawks, which will always happen on gut strings. And I'm sure many animals who have not heard those kinds of sounds before would not be a fan, but Daisy just twitches her ear and continues enjoying the music, so she's a good sport. Just like that. Okay, so I think that's that on Haydn. That's my main little moment. Won't make you listen to my really boring stuff, except maybe someday I'll do a stream with really boring practicing. Those scales are pretty boring, so if you were here for the scales, you're a good sport. Now this other solo, which is from the Richter quartet, again, Richter is a contemporary of Haydn. It's in E flat, so it's pretty nasty for tuning, so what I'll probably do is put a drone on and sort of tune to that, which is really useful and really helpful for intonation. But first I'll tune my instrument, because you certainly can't practice intonation without being in tune yourself. I'll just check into the chat. Thanks for answering. My pleasure. Thanks for asking. Makes it a lot more interesting when you guys are talking and I can answer stuff, because otherwise it's like I'm in a room talking to myself, which is a little bit weird. Yeah, the music stand's probably what's doing it. Yeah, I can switch to a folding stand next time and maybe it wouldn't do that as much. Okay. So I'm gonna get going with Richter solo in E flat now, or might actually, the quartet is in E flat, the solo could be in B flat. And what I use for a tuner, I've had this for a long time, it's a little Korg box, And it does not have temperaments on it, but you can tune the notes by descent. So what I'll do sometimes is I'll find, what I want a B flat to be, a pure B flat. I'll play it on my instrument, and then I'll actually tune the tuner by descent to match the B flat that I want. So I can at least kind of mess with pitch outside of equal temperament. So I'll probably do that now. I think I'm going to start with an E flat drone. So what I'm going to do is find an E flat that I like on the cello. Normally, I would use a low one with an open string, but it's a little warbly in the lower register. So I can go up the octave. Here's an equal temperament E flat. Maybe I'm not too far off. Works for me. Let's try with a B flat. Yeah, so much easier to play in tune with a drone, something really keeping you honest. Let's see how I do without it. Nice. So this one is tricky because I think there are definitely some slurs omitted because we have these triplets and they're actually not slurred, and they would sound really clunky if we were to not do a slur. Something like that. Let me see if I can do the whole thing with no slurs just to see. It's harder and it sounds worse. So finding how and where to do the slurs, though, still a little bit of a project. I didn't mind that. I'll try another option. Didn't mind that either. Basically, the option that I'm working with is there's a long note at the beginning of each measure before the triplets begin, and whether or not to slur in the following triplets to the long note, or to do their own slur. So let's study this further. I'm going to do option 1, slurring them in. Okay, and now option 2, having them on their own slur. I think slurring them in helps make a longer line, which is kind of what we need in this spot, so I think I would err on that side. So, I already figured out something else. That's good. Okay, I've been streaming almost an hour and a half now, pretty good. And this is nice because I actually am held accountable for my practicing, which is good, and it's a little bit more interesting when there are people here to talk to. So I think I might practice maybe one more thing before ending the stream. So I'm going to come back over again. Don't be silly. But how else am I supposed to be in a room by myself talking to myself if I can't be silly? When did I start playing cello? You started playing viola in 6th grade. That's not that different than me. So I started cello when I was in the 4th grade. It was like in my public school string program. So even though that is when I started playing the cello, I didn't take any private lessons, and I didn't really practice. I kind of just went to orchestra and sort of learned at school, and I liked it okay, but I wasn't really serious about it, whereas lots of people, they start private lessons right away, and I think as soon as you're taking private lessons, it's really on a different level because you're held accountable more, you're probably more committed to practicing, and there's just only so much that an orchestra teacher can do for you in a classroom with a bunch of kids, but having the one-on-one instruction is what really makes the difference. So for me, I continued from 4th grade onwards through middle school and the first bit of high school, and when I was in 10th grade, my orchestra director suggested that I take private lessons because it seemed like I liked it and I was interested and it would be a good next step for me. So I gave it a try just because I thought, okay, that sounds okay. And I was just immediately hooked once I had that one-on-one time and I got to hear my teacher, a professional cello player, play right in front of me. It was just a completely different experience than being in a school orchestra, and I just immediately fell in love. My whole love for classical music just came alive and studying the cello. So I was about 14, almost 15 when I actually started lessons, so that really feels like when I really started cello, but I was playing as a younger kid, just not on a very serious level. All right. Anything else while I am sitting here? Otherwise, I'm going to get into the next thing. Okay, so I think the last thing I'm going to practice are these pieces that I'm really excited about these. Technically, there is not really a known composer for these. It's a scan of a facsimile. Here's the cover that focuses. Le gentle air, gentle airs. You see that a lot in French Baroque music. For 2 cellos. And the only thing about a composer here is LeClerc, who is the engraver who transcribed or wrote these out. So I guess he could be considered the composer, but what a lot of them are actually little melodies or tunes from other famous French Baroque pieces, but arranged for 2 cellos. And what's really cool is you see arrangements and stuff like this. You see that in modern day. Lots of people publish little arrangements of things, but to find an actual, early 18th century source of these arrangements is really special, I think. And so these are all kind of written for just 2 cellos. I don't even think it really implies that it needs a continual part like a harpsichord, though there is figured bass in the second cello part, so you could play it with another one. But I think a lot of them just sound really nice on two cellos. I haven't recorded any of these yet, but I'm planning on it, and I think I might do a video where I play both parts. So I just record myself 2 times playing each part together, just because I think that would be a cool thing to do, and I've done a few of those on the channel. Another question, do you have a lot of early music schools in the US? Not really, no. So there are music conservatories that have early music programs, and it definitely is increasing even in the last 5 years because there's more people being interested in early music. So more and more schools are offering, if not an actual degree program in early music, they at least have some classes or some ensembles that are focused on period instruments and performance practice. I would say I could probably think of maybe 5 music schools in the country off the top of my head that do have early music programs. So it's not a lot, but they do exist. I think that Europe has always been a little ahead of us in that way, and it makes sense because this is real European culture, a lot of this music, so it makes sense that a lot of the schools out there would already be working with this kind of stuff. But I do think it's increasing in the US, which is great, because I think it's a whole new layer of classical music that has the potential to get a lot of people interested in classical music in a new way. Okay, so for my last little practice thing, I'm gonna do some of these little bassline duos. And I'll just be practicing the first cello part. Oh, gotta move the chair so it gets in focus. I'll get in the habit eventually. So what I'm gonna play is Le Sauvage, or The Savages, which is from a really famous French Baroque opera. And it's the tune when the Savages first come out in the opera plotline. But it's a pretty popular piece from the French Baroque and one of my favorite tunes in general. So I think it was really cool that it's arranged for these cello arrangements. good stuff to practice technique-wise because we have all these combinations of triplets and eighth notes. And it's really fun when it has the other part too, but you still get a pretty good gist of the harmonies and the sound just from hearing one part at a time. So one of the things, the first technical challenge I see in this piece are the arpeggios. So getting a clean for all your string crossings and short articulation. So I'm going to go a little under tempo and work on some of this. Gets a little trickier, just left hand to get that trill. I could go up into position to save myself the shift, but I don't like the sound quality of the D string as much as the open A. So it's a toss-up. If I can really get there fast enough, it's worth it. When I have new strings, it'll be even easier, but it's great to have a really short, bouncy string where you still really get it ringing. And on gut strings, that usually means the tiniest amount of bow speed, because if you go fast, listen, I'm using plenty of pressure, but it's just too fast. I have to get in there with almost an inch of bow really deep, and I think again new strings and all of that help, but you still got to make it work either way. triplets. So I'm adding some because especially this, it could be played at this slower tempo that I'm practicing it now. It's actually not bad, but I think ideally a little bit faster would be nice and a little more ferocious. And at the faster speed, the triplets, separate bows will probably be a little too much. But I'm varying my slurs on the triplets, whether I'm doing slurs of 3 or I'm slurring the first 2 and separating out the last one. And I still haven't made any final decisions, but it's a good thing to think about when you're adding slurs, which kind of slur makes the most sense based on the writing. So looking at the notes, I can usually tell, like for example, there are some triplets where there's repeated notes. So obviously I can't do a slur of 3 because then I wouldn't get both notes at the end. But I can do a slur of 2 and separate the last one, and it's actually a nice effect on a line like that. Has kind of a rustic feel. So that's an option. When we get more legato stepwise notes, those work fine for slurs of 3. Those are all fine in slurs of 3. But then when we get, again, larger jumps, like even here, we don't have repeated notes, but we have slurs of 3, I think will take away from the fact that we're in thirds instead of stepwise. It kind of takes away from the excitement of having a slightly larger interval than a stepwise motion. So that's another good candidate for maybe a slur of 2 with 1 separate. So I think if I'm gonna add a slur there, it works better to do a slur of 2 with 1 separate. And this is just an informed decision based on the patterns that we see from the time period when composers did write the slurs in. You don't see as often 1 separate with 2 slurred. I think that's a little bit more of a later concept. So usually with triplets like that, I think you're dealing with adding a slur of 3 or doing a slur of 2 with 1 separate at the end. You just want to avoid accenting the separate note too much. You want to, because the third note of a triplet is never the most important, so you don't want to put an accent on it. Okay, so now that I'm a little bit more committed to those bowings, maybe I'll go through the spot where the triplets come in and try those out, and you can see if you like them. Oh, here's a good one. So these are stepwise, so they could be slurred, but there's pretty nasty string crossing. So I might want to do an alternate fingering to avoid that. Kind of nicer. Feels like cheating sometimes, but you gotta do what sounds good. So I'll try that out. Variations of patterns, so I wonder how I should slur those. That works nicely on the arcadence at the end. We have, and I've been slurring 3 and 3, but it might be nice to, I like the idea of doing that one separate, but then I'm going to break my own rule and do a 1 and a 2 slur for the next one. So you can see how it's just kind of problem solving. deciding what sounds the best, what makes the most sense, what fits the character of the piece. Deciding bowing was, you know, you can really find out if people are from two different worlds if they just do not agree on bowings at all. And I've had that happen in rehearsals where one person wants to do all the bowings exactly opposite of what I would do. And bowings are personal to an extent, but they're also very stylistic. So, you know, what you do in bowings is really going to come across of how you're interpreting a style. Okay. Gonna check back in over here. Going on almost 2 hours now. It's great. I'm surprised I had the endurance. I'm bad. Are you still in the chat, guy? Please tell me about how I'm bad. That's funny. Your name's Barney. Barney, you're bad. Golden Queen, your story's like mine. That's awesome. Oh, and you like the Dall'Abaco. That's great. I absolutely love Dall'Abaco. I was so excited the day that I discovered those pieces. If you guys don't know Dall'Abaco, I have some of it on my channel, and I recorded some of it for an album a couple years ago. But they're unaccompanied cello pieces, but they're very melodic and sweet, and sort of different than a lot of the other cello pieces out there, I think. And there's not a lot of unaccompanied cello music that comes from the 18th century. A lot of it actually, besides the Bach cello suites, is from the 17th century, which has a very different character and style. So to find more 18th century solo cello music was really exciting. And surprisingly, not a lot of people had recorded the Dall'Abaco pieces, which was that much more attractive to me. He's stuck in the 80s. Yeah, probably. Okay, so I think I'm getting pretty tired now and ready to take a little break. So I think I'm going to sign off the stream pretty soon. But if you guys have any other lingering questions or thoughts, please feel free to throw them in. And thanks so much just for watching. You know, I wasn't sure if people would be around on this time. It depends where you are in the world, but here in Boston it's Friday afternoon, so it's not like everybody's home. Plenty of people are working and doing things, so it's nice that people tuned in and came to check out the stream. All right, well, it doesn't seem like there's much else, so I think I'm going to sign off. But if you're new and you just hopped in, I would love if you subscribe to the channel. Sorry about the constant autofocusing. I do new videos every week if I can. They're all on my Baroque Cello, and I started the channel doing a lot of unaccompanied music, but I adjusted over time to bring people in and either play continuo for other instruments or have other people play continuo for me. So I try to have the channel include as much as I can in terms of Baroque music on period instruments, and I want to keep expanding it also. I'm super excited that I'm going to be recording a video with harpsichord tomorrow, so that video should be up sometime next week. I love the harpsichord, really excited to have it on the channel, and I just want it to keep growing because there's really not enough early music and Baroque stuff out there on the internet. So I'm happy to be bringing it, and I'm even more happy to see that there are people who are interested in it and excited about it, because so am I. Thanks for the session. I'm a great Baroque teacher. Thank you, Felipe, whichever it is. Thanks for tuning in. So yeah, hope to do more of these. If you ever want to send me any feedback, feel free to shoot me a message on my official Facebook page, which I actually realize now that I did not link. But if you just do Facebook/Emily Plays Cello, you can message me on there or message me on any of my social media, really, Twitter, Instagram. I'm Emily Plays Cello everywhere. So feel free to reach out in any way that you like. And thanks again for watching. Till next time.